We're live.
Good
What's
morning.
up, guys? Good morning. Welcome to the Perpetual Growth Podcast. We're very excited today. We have a good friend, longtime friend, Mr. Jason Hayes is joining us. Welcome, Jason.
Good morning, gentlemen. Bright and
Good.
early. I like the way you do things.
We've got our blue blockers on. Par's, I think, just shipped from his local Amazon warehouse, but so we'll get to a full participation there shortly. But Hayes, how's it going this morning, man?
Save your retina, people. Living the dream, man. Good. Set the alarm 5:15. Already got my workout in, and now I'm just getting juiced up on some coffee and in a fasted state.
Awesome. Par, you're coming to us from Duran this morning?
From Durand. I got my 4-hour driving workout.
Yeah, that's you've really pounded the pavement so far this morning. That's impressive. That is impressive. What do we got on tap here this morning, Par?
Well, we wanted to bring Jason Hayes in here because he's a pretty awesome person. I haven't seen you in what, 4 or 5 years now?
I think it's been about 5 years. Jen and I swung by and visited you and Kimmy when we were in Wisconsin for the last Holcomb family reunion. That's my mom's side. And yeah, Johnny was probably only 5-6 months old at that point. And yeah, and you were starting to crush it as a director at Toppers. And now from everything I'm hearing, you're still crushing it at Toppers. So yeah, it's been a while since I've seen both of you. And Jason, I think you and I were you at Deneen's party?
Yeah, I think it was right before Deneen and Sarah took off back east.
Yeah. Yep.
Lone
Yeah.
Burger.
And there's no excuse for you and I not to see each other every once in a while because we live in the same city. So I live in Denver.
Yeah. We'll get that figured out.
Right.
Well, you were, I don't know if I've ever told you this, Hayes, maybe once or twice, but you were a super important person for me when I first went to Oshkosh, when I first went to college. We were roommates at training camp for soccer, and I got a little homesick.
You did,
and Jason Hayes, he had to talk some sense into me. And you're really good at that.
I've got my moments. I always like to look at it like the sense just needs to come out of most people, but because it's already there. Because I don't think you're a nonsensical person, and I'll tell the group here we might be interrupted by children here shortly, but yeah, I recall that distinctly. It was I was as a freshman in college much older than most of the group, so I was always called Old Man Hayes on the soccer team because I started college when I was 21. So Par was coming out of high school and awesome soccer player, and definitely was ready to call it quits pretty quickly because probably some burnout and some other stuff that goes along with the sport that we all love and adore. But yeah, had a talk in the dorm room, and for me it was all about what an awesome privilege it was to be there, and just to be able to do that. And I saw Par come out there and just destroy it. Played that next season, and then you rightfully so at that point you were done, and you hung up the boots at that point.
And then
instead of getting injured and keeping going, I should have followed your footsteps.
Well, I wish I would have had the passion that you had. I mean, no regrets, but when you look back at that stuff, you're like, yeah, I should have played 4 years, because that was a good time. But
yeah, I mean, you kind of did anyways, right? You're still playing in the spring and all the time, yeah.
But then we ended up living together, and again, you were definitely a good role model. You never let us go to bed without having the dishes done. So that's always something good to carry forward in life.
Those were really good times. And yeah, so when was it my senior year and your junior year, I think, that we roomed together?
Something like
It was
that.
it was that house on Scott Street, and yeah, and I distinctly recall because I bartended my way through college, so I would always, not always, but probably 4 nights of the week, I was, closing a bar down, getting home around 2 a.m. And Parr, faithful soldier, was always up there, and we didn't have cable, we didn't have television, but we had the biggest collection of Monster Bucks you've ever seen in your life. And Parr, and I used to give him flack about it, but it was such a good time because I'd come home and it was such a great way to just unwind, and it was just Monster Bucks with Parr for a good half an hour to an hour. Because when you shut a bar down and it's 2 a.m. and you have to do the till and you're doing all that stuff, you're still wound up. So
Right.
It was awesome. What I remember the most about living with you is that you were still one of the most hardest workers and dedicated to everything that you're still dedicated to. So I see that in this podcast, and you're talking about hunting, you're talking about getting the things done that you want to do. You're laying out goals the way that you always did, even back then, probably unknowingly. And we did a lot of things unwittingly when we were younger, right? So I still see those same qualities coming out in you. So I don't know if I was that big of an influence. I think you've always just had that drive inside you. You've got some fire in your ass, Parr. Let's just be honest. I've seen it on this podcast. Fired up.
I do, but I've had the privilege of having some good people, and you were one of them. So you take those compliments now.
Well, I appreciate that. Thank you. I'll take them. But you had your own influences back on this guy as well. And the first one, actually, going to some of the questions you sent me, I'm just going to jump right in. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I was going to say, I think kind of what brought us together for this is I saw you on Facebook saying that you were doing Sober October, and we kind of connected. And, as everyone knows who watches this, Kobler and I have been on the sober train. Actually, I have had a couple beers since November 1st, but I didn't like it. We can talk about that later.
What? I liked it.
But anyway, so we wanted to come together today and talk about that. So you can jump in, Hayes.
Yeah, no, that's a great segue. You had asked me in some of the prep for this podcast, what drove me to do Sober October, and it's wild. I listen to a lot of podcasts, just so you guys know. So when you guys started coming out with this, I was like, is that Parr and Jason on a podcast? So I started listening, and I was passively listening early September, sitting over that part of the office where I work, and you were talking about how you're doing Sober September. So I listened to Joe Rogan. They did it last year. They did it again this year with him and a bunch of his, very famous comedian friends. But when you brought it up, that's what actually influenced me to do it. So nice. I was listening to this little podcast that we're on right now called Perpetual Growth. And my old buddy Damon was talking about how he's just knocking goals out. He's doing Sober September, blah, blah. And I was like, you know what? I should do that too. And so when you saw me asking if anyone from my family and friends on Facebook wanted to do that, that was after listening to your podcast and you actually giving me some influence and some inspiration to do Sober October. So thank you.
Yeah, there you go.
I started listening to you guys' podcasts. I started listening to the accountability stuff you guys are doing, and I was like, that's awesome. It's long overdue that I do something like that anyways. So Jen and I, a couple years ago, did something called the Whole 30. Have you guys heard about this?
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm.
So it's a diet, it's an elimination diet where you cut out all scientifically proven inflammatory foods, including alcohol, for 30 days. At the time, I was kind of overweight, and I was long due for some dietary changes anyways after, 15 years in technology sales. So we did this, and I saw just amazing results, and part of that, side effect is that you're doing a sober month. Mm-hmm. And so I kept up with that diet for quite a while. But there's still something lacking when you do that, and then you go back and still start to introduce stuff. So when I saw you guys talking about it, I'm like, let's do it again. Let's hit the reset button, but in a different way this time. So my plan moving forward is to keep up with a more strict diet and really limit alcohol to, I hate to use things like special occasions and, because, there's enough kids' birthday parties and other stuff that you go to where you can't be like, that's a special occasion every time you get an invite in the mail, or your friends show up with a bottle of Rumplemints on Halloween night, which happened this year. And, those things. So it's special because, you know, people do want to hang out and you get to be there, but at the same time, there's got to be more limits. And I've always been someone who, you know, you talked about this a little bit, you know, you're like a guy who has a couple beers. I've always been more of a Pringles drinker, you know, like.
I am definitely that as well.
You know, and you know, we've all been there. You're with your buddies, and you just keep popping the top. But so it's really about being more intentional. And you were the original catalyst to spark some of that. So there's a lot of other wellness things that I'm doing as part of this overall change, and that's been going on for a couple of years. And Jason and I just talked about some of that stuff with like these blue light blocking glasses and otherwise. But you know, it's about accountability, helping people, and the results that I've seen as some of these practices are stuff that I do want to start sharing with people. And that was also some of the stuff that you saw that I'm starting to put out on Facebook, and I'm designing a family website right now and some other stuff which will come out shortly.
Nice.
Awesome.
That's the answer to that question, Mr. Parr. So it was you.
Okay, I'll take it.
Right? I'm just being honest, just being truthful. You know me.
So it sounds like Hayes, you and I have had a couple of beers. Coldler, you're still alcohol free.
Still alcohol free. You know, that last Saturday in September. That was the last one. Headed up to Lambeau this weekend, so check in with me next week.
You're going to the game?
Yeah, we're going. Parr's going to join us. He's going to drive up, but we're flying out Friday morning and going to head up there Saturday night. So,
nice.
Yeah, but, you know, just to kind of piggyback off what Hayes shared there, it's you really kind of start to see results, whether it's, you know, physically with your weight. I think this morning for me, just popping right out of bed at 10 after 5 is something that I appreciate now and enjoy after the last month plus, because, you know, even after 1 or 2 beers or, you know, whatever, a White Claw, getting up in the morning out of bed can be a real struggle with really anything that you put into your body, and being aware of what is going in, and what your goals and what your plan for the next day might be can certainly be affected negatively if you're popping Pringles until all hours of the night.
That is the most drastic thing for me, is that it's anytime, anywhere, anything. Like you can just pop up and do whatever.
Yeah.
You know, and if you don't, it's like, you know, I guess any drugs or alcohol, I've always thought of it like walking through water. You know, you just can't quite get going. It's like you're walking through knee-deep water.
That's a really good way to put it.
Yeah.
So, it's like when you have those dreams where you can't run, but it's in reality. No. You know, you guys bring up a good point there, and being able to do, you know, whatever, whenever. And something happened this month that it was one of those situations. And Parr, you talked about this in a couple podcasts ago, basically like, you know, kids are going to intervene in what you're doing. You know, you got to take it gracefully. So it was 2 a.m. Jen and I are fast asleep, and all of a sudden she pops up out of bed and she says, "Jason, you know, my phone's ringing. It's emergency services." I'm like, "What?" I'm out of bed, right? That's instant wake up, adrenaline going. They're calling my phone. I answer. They said, "We're getting an alarm signal from your house. We have an alarm system in the house." Alarm wasn't going off, and normally when I set it, it's set for 0 delay entry time, so it should go off right away. Well, when we set it that night, we had set it to a silent alarm unknowingly, because I had set it on the panel. I usually set it from my phone. So I pop up. You know, I'm scantily clad at this point, and you know, I'm in protection mode, and so I get my firearm out of the safe and my flashlight and everything else, and I asked the lady on emergency services if she can talk to my wife while I clear the house. So I go and proceed to do that, clear the house. The door, when I get downstairs, I clear the upstairs. Lily wakes up. Cooper somehow sleeps through me doing what I do to clear a house. And if you know anything about these protocols, there's a bit of yelling to try to scare someone who might be in the house out of the house before you have to do anything about it. And so I go through these protocols, and when I get to the landing on the stairs, the door is flapping wide open. That night, and I'm sure Jason, you're aware of this, we had like 100-mile-an-hour winds.
Yeah.
So I get the door shut, no sign of forced entry, clear the house, start to calm down, and I recollect with Jen after we get Lily back to bed. I went through that protocol that I've trained for, many times. I did it perfectly, and I wrote it out actually afterward and made sure that what I recalled was actually what happened according to Jen and everything else. And so that's one of those ones where if you would have been Pringles popping until the wee hours in the morning, would you at that point have reacted that way?
Right.
Luckily, I don't know the answer to that because it happened to be that we were doing it. It happened during Sober October, but that's an eye-opening moment. Well, in recollection, I hadn't been out front in a while, and I love my wife, not to throw her under the bus or anything, because it's perfectly honest mistake. She had gone out front to water the plants earlier and didn't deadbolt the door on her way back in. And it's just, 100-mile-an-hour winds, the pressure, it popped it open and set the alarm off. So thank God it wasn't anything that was real, but it was one of those exercises that you look back and go, I'm real glad that I wasn't under the influence the night before.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. What a crazy story.
I know.
Whew.
That's not the first time something like that's happened to me either, but I won't go into.
Oh my gosh. Just knowing you, I can just imagine you clearing that house. Like just so on point.
And I'll be perfectly honest. That night at 3:00 in the morning when I finally settled down, I did have one beer. I was like, I am shaken. You're recollecting everything that's happened. I'm sitting right at this computer writing it all out, and Dan was like, I'm going back to bed. I'm like, I'm having a beer.
Yeah.
So I did cheat that night with one beer to settle back down at 3 a.m. in the morning.
But everybody's safe. Everybody's safe. Wow. That's like the quintessential example right there, Mm-hmm. It's what do I do if someone breaks into my house, and I'm all wasted.
Right.
I'm glad everything turned out, well there, but that's a great example. Wow. Thanks for sharing that.
It was wild.
Yeah. That's so wild. I don't know all the questions Par sent you, but I have one thing that I kind of just thought of as we're sitting here talking.
Sure.
That I wanted to ask both of you. What, if anything, do you think our upbringing in the Midwest and Wisconsin specifically, how do you think that shaped our relationships with alcohol?
Par, hit that one.
Well, it's tough for me because I don't know any other way. I haven't seen a different part of the country or a different culture or part of the world. I just know that alcohol is always prevalent
Mm-hmm.
at any social gathering that you ever go to. It's the norm.
Mm-hmm.
So I see your tendency is you're so much more likely to indulge if that's the case. Yeah,
and that I didn't think of that. Hayes, are you Milwaukee area originally?
I was born in Janesville. Kind of lived all over southern Wisconsin growing up. Settled at Middleton for high school.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
Nice.
So west side of Madison for high school was all over the place when I was young. Yeah, Oconomowoc and then Milwaukee and a bunch of different spots.
Yeah. And, obviously we're in Colorado now, both of us. So that's a good point, Par. We do have that alternate perspective on, outside of those state boundaries. And, the Midwest in general, I guess I would say. But it's something that I thought about last night, before hopping into bed and getting ready for this morning. And it was definitely, I think it has that, those roots are there,
Yeah.
social gathering, or maybe not very social, or you're just sitting at home watching football or basketball or, something else.
Yeah.
Going
Yeah.
outside.
And we perpetuate it too. We've brought it with us, right, Jason? I mean,
yeah. Oh,
it's
yeah.
not, yeah, it doesn't go away when you cross state lines, and I've seen that across multiple states now, having settled in Colorado for now. I think the ultimate microcosm of that is, I'll call it a family reunion. And we talk about that. Yeah, I talk about that all the time with people. But here's what my family reunion looks like, every couple of years back in Wisconsin. We all get there. There's cheesy potatoes, there's brats, there's beer, there's a euchre tournament. You're playing half-drunk volleyball, and you're loving life. And my Wisconsin accent comes out at that point because I've been drinking and everything else. And it's an awesome time. Don't get me wrong. I wouldn't change it for the world. But that's almost every social gathering from the culture we grew up in.
Yeah.
So even playing soccer in Milwaukee after, when we were playing with Croatian Eagles and some of the guys, we'd go down there. As soon as the game's over, they're serving up Slivovitz, and you're doing shots of Schlivo because you won or you didn't win. Doesn't matter. The Schlivo's there. I think it's a great question. And now it's, how do we uncouple that, create new traditions around our family, while also not losing it. Right?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah, I will say that Kimmy's family is a very good influence, our very good influence in this respect, because you go to some gatherings with her family and there's no alcohol. Like, there are a couple houses in her family where, drinks are over here, and you go on the cooler and there's water, soda, juice, and you're like, what? And then
Cooler.
And then everybody's sitting around and the conversations are, sober and rich. And after a little while, you're like, oh, this is pretty nice. So.
Oh my goodness. No, it's funny because it's true, but it's also like, okay, wow. There's a little more there.
Yeah.
For sure. It's awesome.
I'm interested in the last question that I sent you, Hayes. I feel like we should just go there, or this thing could turn into like 3 hours.
We can definitely go on and on, right? Okay, yeah. The last question you sent me, number one attribute that I could attribute my success to in life is a very tough question, right? If you try to boil it down to one. Ooh, I mean, there isn't just one, right? Because there's personalities and things that come through. Clearly, like you talked about earlier, I'm very persistent. So I'm going to say that and just kind of push it to the side and keep that in mind when I say that I think communication has been probably the number one thing for me in being successful. A little background on me. I was an English major in college. I started as a business and Spanish double major and changed that pretty quickly. Frankly, business school was just boring. And I've always loved communications and rhetoric. And so I graduated with an English degree, Spanish minor, and my emphasis was in creative writing. You always have to be careful what you tell yourself in life, gentlemen, because I had told myself at one point, I think it was when I was living with you, Par, that one, I'll never work in a cube and I'll never live in Chicago. So fast forward a 6-month stint down in Florida doing some demolition and construction, came back, and an old friend of mine got me hooked up with CDW, who I spent a decade there doing technology sales, both inside to start with, and then moved into their advanced technology field division after about 6 years. And of course, to start it out, I had to live in Chicago and work in a cube. So, I told myself I wasn't going to be that, and I became that. And it turns out I did have a propensity for sales. I probably should have seen that earlier on, being a bartender and other stuff, I've always been about, people and serving them and everything else. Now it's just in a lot more intentional way, but I digress. Communication is, for me, the key. I mean, it's what either brings us together, in our organizations, in our families, in our lives, or it's what tears us apart because we're not good at it. And believe me, I have had my fair share of being not good at it. And that's probably part of, the persistence thing that I mentioned earlier is, you got to just keep trying, no matter how bad you are at something, to get better. And you learn a lot when you're trying to call up strangers and ask them to do business with you about communicating with people and respecting their time and other things like that. So I would say communication for me, on top of other attributes that kind of drive home that I think the number one attribute, to answer your question. More coffee.
What advice would you have if somebody was fearful of communication, like fearful of making that call?
Believe me, that wells up a lot of emotions in me, right? I'm still fearful of it every single day because, as a frontline seller, you're putting yourself out there on behalf of your company and trying to represent them in the best way possible. And you always have to be mindful about how you do that. And I think over the last 15 years, some of that has changed quite a bit, as opposed to, 15 years ago when I started at CDW, there was inbounds, there was outbounds. It felt, it was very competitive, and I obviously am a competitive individual, so that's I think some of the reason I took to it. You really just have to remind yourself that the person on the other side of that phone or computer or whatever is human just like you.
Mm-hmm.
And just do whatever you can to serve that person in every conversation. You're never going to get over the fear, but the fear is normal and natural, and it's there for a reason, right? And I think nowadays it's easier because you can actually talk about that fear and be a lot more transparent. In fact, there's a book that just came out called The Transparency Sale. And if you guys haven't looked at that, it's really about being transparent to help your buyer or anyone in your life turn off that fear, that limbic nervous system in your brain that we all get, right? If someone calls me up to sell me something, that thing clicks on in me just like when I'm clearing my house, right? Mm-hmm. And it happens in everyone's lives. And so it happens to you guys. So anytime someone calls us up and wants to ask us for our time or sell us something, it's natural for that to turn on because it's a fight or flight response that your body does when it knows that this might not be a useful thing for you. So transparency is the best way to get someone on the other side of the phone to let their guard down. Just be transparent. It's obviously I'm in sales. I'm not going to call you up and be like, look, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just trying to find out if there's a relationship here that could be mutually beneficial. But, I would say embrace that fear, but try to harness it in a way that, can help someone on the other side of the phone or the computer or however else you communicate nowadays.
Transparency Sale by Todd Capone.
Yep. Yeah, and if you're not in sales, I would say check out the Cliff Notes version of it, because you're going to get a lot of information out of that. So, that's one of the books I've read of recent.
I picked up such a basic thing there. Like it's like any story is far better if it has, an intro, a body, and a conclusion, and a transparent intro. I see that when I'm training people. If I give them an intro and let them know what my intentions are and be extremely transparent about how I am, and, I'm going to be super intense. So if I'm being too intense, just let me know.
Right. Okay. I got some fire in me.
But it always goes better. And if I forget to set it up, then it's not as effective, And
I think just being intentional about that is the key. And you're very good at that. That after the experience of probably going up in front of people and not doing that and seeing the opposite results of what you're trying to get out of that training group, right?
Yes, sir.
Nice.
I didn't put any time on this.
Where are we at? You guys try to keep it to a certain.
Well, it can balloon into the extended version very quickly.
Right.
Yeah, I'd say we try to keep it to about now or 10 minutes less.
Yeah.
Sounds good.
Yeah. Par, I know you want to get out there and get in a tree. Hayes, good to see you. Good to talk to you. And we're going to connect here. Par, will you start a group chat for us so Hayes and I can get connected here since we're neighbors? Pretty please.
Absolutely. Yeah, this has been great. It's so awesome to hear your insight and talk to you, Hayes, also.
No, yeah, thank you, Hayes. Appreciate it. Any questions, any comments, anything you guys want to see next time, just drop us a line in the comments, and we're looking forward to bringing you more content here. Content all the time.
Thank you, gentlemen.
And my goal for the day is to send you two a picture of a buck within the next 4 hours.
Yeah, go get one for us, buddy. Go get one.
Yeah, get some jerky going.
All right, we're out of here.
Have a great day, guys.
Later, guys.
Bye-bye.